They thought cutting me would fix their budget. They didn't think about what I took with me. My name is Nathan Bell. I'm 43 years old. I live in Louisville, Kentucky, and until last Thursday, I worked as the Director of Regulatory Compliance at Whitehall Logistics. I was sitting in one of those glass-walled conference rooms that make you feel like you're on display. Greg Larkin, my boss for the last 9 years, was flipping through a stack of papers, not meeting my eyes. That was the first clue. Greg's a handshake and smile kind of guy. When he avoids eye contact, you know something's coming. Nate, he said finally, I want to start by saying how much we appreciate what you've built here. That's when I knew for sure. We're going through a bit of restructuring, streamlining operations. You understand how it is. I didn't say anything. Just let him go on. Your department's being consolidated under a broader risk and controls umbrella. Effective today, it's redundant. 12 years building Whitehall's compliance structure from scratch, and I was now redundant. Greg slid a manila envelope across the table. 3 months severance, he said, like it was some generous gift. We can offer outplacement services too, if you want. I took the envelope and stood up without a word. No dramatic speech, no threats, just a quiet nod. I looked at Greg one last time. He looked relieved I hadn't made a scene. As I left the room, I passed Mason, the new guy they brought in 3 weeks ago. Couldn't have been more than 23, fresh out of college, still wearing the security badge on a lanyard like a freshman ID. I gave him a polite nod. He looked nervous. I couldn't blame him. I packed up my office in under 15 minutes. Not much to take. A few framed photos, a couple of certificates, a souvenir mug from our Charlotte branch. Before I logged off my terminal, I transferred my personal copies of the compliance framework I had built. All legal, all documented. Nothing confidential. Just the architecture. My blueprint. When I walked out of the building, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt still, calm, like a storm waiting offshore. They thought they were saving 70 grand a year by cutting me. What they didn't realize was that Mason, bright as he might be, had no idea what he was stepping into. The system I'd built wasn't just a bunch of files and templates. It was muscle memory. It was years of workarounds and judgment calls and knowing which regulation mattered on which form on which day. And there was no manual. Just me. Greg thought cutting me would fix their budget. He didn't think about what I took with me. 48 hours later, Mason would delete the only master copy of the compliance directory. Backups weren't due for 2 more days. I had changed the backup schedule after the last system crash and hadn't yet trained him on the interim protocols. The clock was already ticking, and I wasn't going to stop it. I wasn't there anymore to clean up their mess, but I still had my copies. 2 days after I walked out, I got a call from Alex. She's still with Whitehall, works in billing, but has a good head for operations. She didn't waste time with small talk. Did you hear? She asked. Hear what? New kid, Mason. He deleted the core compliance directory. Like? Everything. I almost laughed. How? He thought he was cleaning up space on the shared drive. Deleted the master folder and emptied the trash. No backup until Friday. That hit me like deja vu. I changed the backup schedule after a system crash last fall, moving it to Friday nights to avoid overlap with FREIGHTCON's reporting cycle. I had planned to document the change. I hadn't gotten the chance. Let me guess, I said. FREIGHTCON got hit with an inspection. She was quiet for a second. Yeah, how'd you know? Because that's what happens. FREIGHTCON was our biggest client. We handled logistics compliance for half their mid-Atlantic operations. One little hiccup in documentation, one missing SOP, one unsigned bill of lading, and the whole supply chain grinds to a halt. Greg was about to find out what I meant when I used to say, our system is delicate by design. I got the full picture from Alex that afternoon. The audit request had come in from a regional DOT inspector, standard surprise inspection, nothing extreme, just bad timing. They asked for the monthly chain of custody logs, cross-referenced with transit refrigeration records. Mason had no idea what they were talking about. He went digging, realized the main compliance framework, the folder labeled regcomp_master, was gone. Panicked. Tried restoring it from OneDrive. Nothing. Called IT. IT called around. Nobody had a copy. Nobody even knew what they were supposed to be looking for. I could picture it perfectly. Greg in the conference room, red in the face, barking at Mason while Dana from FREIGHTCON sat quietly on mute. Dana's not one to raise her voice, but she remembers everything. She knows who's responsible for what. She's not going to forget that Whitehall couldn't produce their own documentation. Later that day, I got a text from an unknown number. Hi Nathan, Dana here from FREIGHTCON. Would you have a moment to chat? Something's come up, and we could really use your insight. I stared at it for a while. This was the first real shift. FREIGHTCON was reaching out directly, not through Greg, not through Whitehall. I called her. Her voice was tight, professional, but I could hear the strain. Whitehall's team is struggling with some of the compliance documents, she said. And I know you're no longer with them, but you built most of the original systems, right? I did. There's a set of SOPs for cold chain transit that we're being asked to provide. They're missing. I have copies from 6 months ago, but nothing recent. I might have a backup, I said, but it won't include the full documentation set, just the basic protocol outlines. That's fine. Honestly, anything helps. I'm just trying to keep the auditors from flagging our process. I didn't send everything. I sent her a sanitized version, just enough to show intent and process, not enough to fix the real holes. After we hung up, I sat back in my chair, letting it all settle. Greg had made a bet that compliance could be run by a junior hire and a shared drive. That bet was already collapsing. And now FREIGHTCON, the one account keeping their East Coast operation afloat, was looking for help outside the firm. That evening, Alex texted me again. Greg pulled Mason into his office twice. IT's trying to recover ghost files. Everyone's in damage control. You'd think the building was on fire. I didn't reply. They were right about one thing. I didn't fit their new streamlined operation. But what they never understood was, I wasn't just running the system. I was the system. He thinks he can rebuild the system from scratch. He has no idea what he's missing. Dana called me again the next morning, this time on my personal line. No pretense, just straight to business. I sent the partial protocols you gave me to the audit team. They bought us a few days, but they're asking questions I can't answer. What kind of questions? Chain verification, escalation logs, temperature variance thresholds, all the things Whitehall used to handle. Mason doesn't know what half of it means. Neither does Greg. I almost felt bad for her. Dana wasn't the one who made the cut, but she was the one taking the hit. Can you help us again? She asked. Just enough to bridge this gap? I can send you a stripped-down compliance matrix. It won't pass a full inspection, but it'll show the auditors you've got controls in place. That's all we need for now. So I did. I pulled an old version from my personal archive, removed the live data, and sent her the framework, skeleton structure only, enough to stall for time, not enough to fix the foundation. Inside Whitehall, though, things were starting to crack. Greg held 2 all-hands meetings in 3 days. According to Alex, the tone had shifted from "we've got this under control" to "we need everyone to stay focused." That's Greg speak for "we're screwed," but I can't admit it yet. Mason was flailing. He couldn't answer basic questions. Didn't know the difference between a Form 721 and a Form 714. Didn't realize that some records were required to be kept in hard copy under state regulations. Even the warehouse team was starting to notice. By Thursday, the blame game had begun. IT pointed fingers at Mason. Mason said he hadn't been trained. HR stayed quiet. They always do when something smells like liability. And Greg? Greg started reaching out to old contacts, trying to piece together the system from scratch. The thing is, you can't rebuild what you never understood. Whitehall's compliance wasn't just a checklist. It was an ecosystem, a living, breathing set of processes that evolved every quarter, tailored to every client. FREIGHTCON, in particular, had 4 separate regulatory frameworks depending on whether a shipment crossed state lines, passed through controlled substances inspection, or involved third-party carriers. Greg thought it was a spreadsheet and some PDFs. What he didn't realize was that I built half the triggers manually, watched every regulatory update like a hawk, and customized protocols on the fly. None of that lived in a binder. It lived in my head. And now, it was gone. Later that evening, Dana called again, but this time it wasn't just for help. "We're talking internally," she said carefully, "about making a change." I said nothing. "I've been authorized to ask if you'd be open to a short-term contract, just through the audit period. Full independence. You wouldn't be reporting to Whitehall. Direct line to FREIGHTCON only." I leaned back in my chair. I'd consider it. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. While Whitehall scrambled, I was already shifting into a different orbit, one where my skills were valued, not dismissed, where my knowledge wasn't buried under corporate cost-cutting and shallow PowerPoints. The irony was almost poetic. Greg thought I was a line item, replaceable, streamlined. But now, the people who mattered, the ones who'd trusted the work, were coming to me directly. He was trying to rebuild a system with no foundation. I was about to show him what real structure looked like. He thought he'd cut dead weight. What he really did was sever the one person holding everything together. Dana and I met for coffee at a spot near FREIGHTCON's downtown office, neutral ground, quiet corner booth. Real mugs instead of paper cups. She slid a plain folder across the table. "Here's the contract. Short term, 30 days, renewable. Your rate is 3 times your last salary at Whitehall." I opened the folder, scanned the details. My name looked good on that top line. Even better next to the new title, Independent Compliance Consultant. "I'll sign," I said, "but I have one condition. There's a non-compete clause that says I won't consult for Whitehall. Fine. I want that flipped. Dana raised an eyebrow. You want to block Whitehall from contacting you? During the contract? Yes. I don't want them calling me behind your back, begging for handouts. She didn't even hesitate. Done. I signed. She countersigned. And that was it. On Monday morning, I walked into FREIGHTCON HQ not as a desperate ex-employee, but as a contractor, clean slate, full authority, no ties. Their people looked at me differently. I wasn't part of the mess anymore. I was the guy fixing it. My first job was a full internal audit. I warned Dana ahead of time. I wouldn't sugarcoat anything. If I found issues, I'd document them. All of them. By Wednesday, I had 3 pages of violations. One involved refrigerated pharmaceuticals. A full shipment that had spoiled during transit. No flagged alerts, no documented variance reports, and worst of all, no recall logs. That alone could trigger a federal fine. Another issue, driver logs weren't matching dispatch records. A few were off by only minutes, but one driver showed a route time that violated the Department of Transportation's fatigue limit. That could have meant criminal charges if it led to an accident. The final blow? Half the vendor certifications were expired. Someone at Whitehall had been sleeping at the wheel. I put it all into a report. I didn't gloat. I didn't embellish. I let the facts speak. Dana read the summary, then leaned back in her chair. Send this to Greg, she said. But don't copy anyone else. You sure? Yes. I wanted to be the first to see how far they've fallen. So I did. The next morning, FREIGHTCON's legal team sent Whitehall a notice. They had 7 days to remedy all listed compliance failures or face contract termination. Alex texted me later that afternoon. Greg's been pacing the halls like a madman. Emergency meeting every hour. Someone heard him say the word lawsuit. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I knew what was happening inside that building. Greg was watching the walls close in. Every shortcut he'd taken, every dollar he thought he'd saved by cutting my roll, was now costing him tenfold. Whitehall had assumed they could replace me with a kid and a drive full of PDFs. But compliance isn't about templates. It's about judgment, foresight, knowing which rule matters before it breaks. And now, the one company that had relied on me the most was giving them an ultimatum, written in my words, backed by my work. The damage wasn't personal. It was structural. And I wasn't their safety net anymore. I was the proof they'd failed. Greg called me while I was cooking dinner. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. And again. Third time, I answered, just to hear the sound of him squirming. Nate, he said, trying to sound casual. Hey, hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. You are. There was a pause, like he wasn't sure what tone to take. Begging? Threatening? Friendly? Look, he said finally, I know things got off on the wrong foot when you left. That's on me. But I was hoping we could talk, maybe work something out. I stirred the pasta sauce and said nothing. I'm authorized to offer a consulting retainer, he continued. FREIGHTCON's been pretty aggressive, and, we could use your help getting ahead of it. Name your rate. I let the silence hang. Let him feel the weight of it. I'm under contract, I said at last, and there's an NDA in place. I can't discuss anything related to FREIGHTCON or your company until that contract ends. He tried to sound reasonable. Come on, Nate. Off the record, just between us. You know this wasn't personal. I laughed. You're right. It wasn't personal. It was stupid. Click. I hung up and blocked his number. 5 minutes later, Alex texted me. You won't believe this. Greg just called an emergency meeting. Again, he's spiraling. IT says the system audit failed. Legal's involved now. Then a follow-up. He offered Mason a week of unpaid leave and told him to figure it out. Kid looked like he was about to cry. I set my phone down and poured a glass of wine. Greg thought he was saving $70,000 a year by cutting me. Now he was days away from losing $1 million account. And it was about to get worse. That weekend, Carl, an old warehouse manager I used to work with, reached out. We hadn't talked in months, but he'd always had my back, even when management didn't. You free to talk? He asked. Sure. He didn't waste time. You were targeted, Nate. I found something. What kind of something? He sent a photo of a printed memo, dated 2 months before my termination. Subject line, Q3 reductions, strategic realignments. There it was, my name, listed alongside other mid-senior roles. Handwritten notes in the margins, no direct revenue contribution, replace with junior staff, minimize severance optics. You weren't laid off, Carl said. You were a line item in a spreadsheet. I sat with that for a while. I mean, I'd known, but seeing it written, cold and clinical, hit different. They tried to cut fat, he added. Turns out they sliced bone. I thanked him, told him if he ever needed a job, you should call me first. Later that night, I forwarded the memo to Dana. She didn't reply with words, just a thumbs up emoji. Inside Whitehall, Greg was drowning. He thought he could fix it with phone calls and rushed meetings. He thought a Band-Aid could stop the bleeding. But now, the bleeding was internal. His staff was losing faith. His clients were pulling back. And the people he cut loose? We were out here building something better, something stronger. Greg made his choice. He chose the spreadsheet. Now the spreadsheet was choosing back. The blowback hit faster than anyone expected. It started with the memo. Carl hadn't been the only one who'd seen it. Turns out, someone in HR had forwarded it to a few trusted team leads as part of the budget planning packet. And someone, probably someone pissed about Greg's management style, leaked it. Subject line: they planned it. It spread like wildfire through Whitehall's internal chat. I got screenshots from Alex. My name circled in red. Comments underneath. So Nate was cut to make room for Greg's nephew? Well, they really thought compliance didn't matter. And now FREIGHTCON's leaving? Coincidence? By Monday, Greg had lost control of the narrative. People stopped making eye contact with him in the hallway. The team leads started coordinating without him. Even the warehouse guys, the ones who never cared about office politics, were openly mocking how Mason still couldn't explain the difference between a deviation report and a violation notice. Then came the conference. Alex had applied months ago to speak at the National Logistics and Risk Forum, back when she was just another mid-level analyst. After everything went down, she reached out and asked if I wanted the slot. I think people need to hear what happens when institutional knowledge walks out the door, she said. I shook my head. They won't listen if it comes from me. It'll just sound like revenge. But from you, it's a lesson. So she rewrote the talk. New title: What Happens When Experience Walks Out the Door. She presented it in a packed ballroom in Chicago. No PowerPoint, just her, a microphone, and 15 minutes of clear, brutal truth. She didn't name Whitehall. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew. Greg had flown out for the conference, probably thinking he could do damage control. He sat in the back row, according to a mutual contact. He left halfway through the talk. Didn't even stay for the Q&A. 2 days later, FREIGHTCON made it official. A brief, polite announcement. Effective immediately, FREIGHTCON is terminating its compliance services agreement with Whitehall Logistics due to material operational failures. They didn't name Greg. But again, they didn't need to. Alex got a standing ovation when she got back to the office. Then she put in her 2 weeks' notice. By the end of that month, 5 more employees left. Some followed me. Some went to competitors. All cited leadership instability as their reason. Greg held on for another week. Then the board stepped in. He resigned to pursue other opportunities. The press release was bland. Internally, everyone knew the truth. His miscalculation had cost the company its largest account, its credibility, and now, its stability. Meanwhile, I was invited to submit a case study to a federal task force on logistics reform. They were working on new compliance legislation. Someone on the task force had seen Alex's talk and reached out. I wrote the study anonymously, titled it, The Cost of Convenience, a Real-World Compliance Breakdown. They didn't print names. But industry folks? They knew. They knew who Greg was. They knew who I was. And they knew exactly what had happened. I didn't need revenge. I had the truth. And in our business, truth spreads faster than any memo ever could. The ones they discarded became the ones fixing the industry. 6 weeks after Greg resigned, I signed on with Morrison Transport as their new director of compliance. But this time, with equity and full control of the department. No red tape. No overpaid VPs second-guessing the people doing the work. Just me, and a clear directive. Rebuild it right. First order of business? Bring in the people who actually knew what they were doing. I called Carl. You still interested in leaving Whitehall? He laughed. I've been waiting for this call. Then I reached out to Alex. She didn't hesitate. She didn't even ask for the salary before she said yes. Said it was the first time in years someone treated her like more than just a spreadsheet cell. And then, believe it or not, I called Mason. He answered on the first ring, voice cautious. Nathan, I've got a role. Consulting arm. Entry level. But you'd be working directly under me. He paused. You want me? After everything? I don't blame you for what happened. You were thrown into a minefield without a map. I've seen your notes. You're sharp. You just didn't have a chance. There was silence for a second, then, okay, I'm in. Mason showed up early on his first day, suit a little too big, nerves visible but focused. He wasn't the same kid I saw outside the conference room that day. He was hungrier now. Humbled. We started small. Our first client was a mom-and-pop trucking company outside Indianapolis. They were struggling to keep up with changing cross-state regs, terrified of their first audit. We did the whole job, audit, documentation, training for $50,000. Not bad for 3 weeks' work. Word spread fast. By the end of that quarter, we had 5 more clients lined up. Companies who had seen what happened to Whitehall and didn't want to be next. They didn't want bloated agencies or fancy dashboards. They wanted people who'd actually done the work, who knew what failure looked like and how to prevent it. I started drafting plans for a full consulting wing, hired a part-time trainer, built a digital SOP toolkit that could scale. Every new client came through a referral. No cold calls, no paid ads, just reputation. And we didn't just take anyone. If a company didn't respect the work, if they wanted shortcuts, cosmetic fixes, or compliance theater, we passed. Because we weren't just patching holes anymore. We were building something stronger than anything I ever had at Whitehall. And then one afternoon, as I was reviewing a potential partnership list, I saw a name I hadn't heard in months. Greg Larkin, interviewing for a compliance coordinator position at a small logistics firm in St. Louis. Entry level, no leadership title, no staff. I happened to be at a regional networking event the following week when I saw him across the room. Same tired gray suit, thinner now. No one clustered around him. He was staring at his phone, probably checking for an email that wasn't coming. We made eye contact. I walked right past him, didn't stop, didn't nod. He looked away. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about proving that the people you throw away are often the ones you'll need most when the system fails. Whitehall tossed experience out the door. We picked it up, dusted it off, and turned it into a blueprint for something better. They only realize your worth when you're gone. 3 months into running my own operation, I got an email from the Department of Transportation. They were putting together a federal task force to evaluate national logistics compliance standards. Someone had passed along my case study. Would I be interested in joining? I said yes, but not to gloat, not to wave my credentials in front of the same industry that once saw me as disposable. I said yes because I knew exactly what could go wrong when companies treated compliance like an afterthought. The task force met virtually, twice a week. Some heavy hitters were involved: federal reps, corporate policy directors, even a few insurance executives. Everyone had war stories. Mine became the foundation for one section of the final proposal: structured knowledge transfers and staff protection protocols. The draft used sanitized terms like case study A, organizational knowledge loss due to workforce realignment. But in every meeting, when someone brought up the Whitehall example, everyone knew exactly who they meant. I didn't push to be named, didn't need the credit. I had more important things to focus on. These days, I work from home in a quiet suburb just outside Louisville. My home office is simple: desk, 2 monitors, whiteboard covered in flowcharts. I consult for 12 companies now, ranging from regional trucking firms to mid-size fulfillment centers. Some of them just need policy templates. Others want full audits. Every one of them came through referrals. Every one of them pays on time. Last week, I got an email from a young compliance officer in Iowa. "Hi Nathan, I'm new to this world, and someone gave me your name. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to build a system that actually works. I've read your task force notes, but I'm looking for practical advice." I smiled and spent 2 hours writing back. Broke it all down. How to design for scale, how to anticipate audit points, how to train for failure without creating fear. I ended the email with one line: document everything like you're the only one who knows how it works. Because one day, you might be. 2 days later, one of my old clients forwarded that email to their board. The subject line read, "This is our new compliance policy." I laughed when I saw it, not out of pride, out of peace. What started as a gut punch in a glass-walled conference room had turned into a quiet, unstoppable ripple across the industry. I didn't just recover, I reshaped the standard. And every time someone says, "We don't want to be the next Whitehall," I know we're moving in the right direction. Because the next time someone like me walks out the door, they'll think twice. And maybe, just maybe, they'll hold the door open instead.